Hey, welcome back. Picked up this Pratt & Whitney Model 3C lathe, circa 1940s-ish, not exactly sure. And I figured I'd do a video series on fixing it up. So this isn't the original paint color. This has been painted by a previous owner. Here's the nameplate, you can see that. Yeah. So it's got a 10-inch swing, meaning I can turn something with a 5-inch radius. And then I can turn something 20 inches between centers, just about, depends. And this is number 213. So I think they only made a couple thousand of these at the most. This was sort of a post-depression lathe. And as far as I can tell, this was used in some machine shops, but it's sort of a home gamer size, so not a lot of people would have bought this sort of thing. So I'm gonna go through this piece by piece and make a different video on each piece, and should be a fun time. So if we want to start over here, these originally had 4 speeds that you could select just with this dial. And you see you have forward slow, forward fast, and then reverse slow, reverse fast. The bulk of the speed changing was done either the gears in here, or I'm sorry, the pulleys in here, the belt, or if you come through here, there would be pulley on the motor. And originally there was a 3-phase motor that had a gearbox attached to it. That gearbox had a couple of cones that would push against one another, and depending on the amount of grip between those cones, you get a different sort of gear ratio. You change the amount of slip. I don't have that. I do have the original cast motor mount, but this came with a 220 volt motor, and I don't have 220 in the garage, so I'm going to put a 120 in there and we'll go through the electrics. Right now I just have the wires sort of poking through the table and hanging out there. I'm going to replace all that, and it should be a fun video. Over to the Carriage. It has one of those old school tool posts that you see a lot on the old Atlas Craftsman lathes from 40, 50, 60s. Just a screw on top, and there's a T in here that sort of holds the tool in place between those. I got a fair bit of carbide tooling, this sort of brazed carbide tooling. I don't know if that'll focus. Maybe not. A lot of this is carbide. I have some high-speed steel, and I got a couple of these shanks, which is nice. The interesting thing about this is that you have your one slide goes sort of crosswise. I don't know the exact terms. And this slide that goes along the axis of the lathe. The top slide is also a compound. So, this has, I don't know if we can see that. Sort of has a protractor there. Maybe not. Where you can turn this at any angle. So you can cut tapers, but you might notice that I don't have a lead screw, so I can't cut threads using the lathe. I have to use taps and dies, which is no problem for me. This came with a 4-jaw chuck. I'm not sure who makes it. I know that it locks on here. Normally, the way you see this lathe is it takes collets, and it takes 5 PN collets, if I remember correctly. There is, I think Hardinge still makes 5 PN collets, but I couldn't find any that weren't on eBay, and missing a couple here and there. I might buy a set of collets in the future, but a 4-jaw should be fine for most stuff. Get it roughly centered. I'm not looking for something super precise right now. Came with a tailstock. This is pretty nice. Oh, I locked it. So that spins pretty well. And I believe this is a number 2 Morse taper, because I have a couple number 2s up here. This is just some of the tooling that I got with it. A couple of Jacobs chucks. Just a blank taper with a shank, and I think this is a dog, that's what it's called. A dead center and a live center I got over the bench. So the guy who owned this before, a little history on it, the guy who owned this before me apparently was a cabinet maker, so he turned a lot of brass on it for handles, and he also turned a little bit of wood, so the ways and the T-slot and the ways are pretty gunked up. And so I'm going to need to get in there with like a toothbrush and some WD-40 and go ham on the ways. Speaking of those, let's see if I can get... Oh yeah, so for gross carriage adjustment, there's a large knob down here that interfaces with a T-slot. There's a bolt inside the T-slot up here, and that just allows you to get that out of the way. The way that's kept square, I'll go into this when I break apart the carriage and clean it up. There's sort of a square here that's on a separate T, and that slides back and forth and keeps it square against the side of the bed. Back to the ways. So they're a little rusty, and a little chewy right here. I don't think it'll focus on that. There's a little chewed up spot right here. The compound doesn't look like it's been, this lathe has been crashed too much. There's a chip out of it here, but, overall it looks like this lathe has been really babied throughout its life. So I'm going to just take some really fine steel wool to the rust spots and, maybe a straight edge to it and see if there's any like dips and high spots, but I'm really not going to touch the ways too much just because I don't have enough skill to take out any damage at this point. So I think that about covers everything. It came mounted to this big table, the cast iron legs below, and it's just affixed with a couple of bolts. It has some holes in the base here, and then one down here near the tail stock that just bolt to the table. And there is a bit of a gap. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. I want to seal that gap. I may do that in the future, or maybe route out the table, a 1/4 of an inch, and sink it down, because when I picked this up to move it, there were a lot of chips between these, and I really don't want to be just accumulating a layer of gunk as I work. This did come on casters. You can see my toaster oven from a previous video. This did come on casters, and I'm probably going to take those off. They lock, but not anymore. So I might try to get them to lock. This isn't a super heavy-duty lathe, and I'm not doing super precise work, but I would like to have it as rigid as possible, and casters don't really allow that. So that's about it. I'm just gonna go over to the bench and show you a little bit of the tooling that I got with this. I think I got a pretty good deal on it, and I'm really happy with the shape that it's in. With these old lathes, the old cast iron, it's sometimes kind of a crapshoot what you get. It doesn't look like there are any cracks in the bed or the base or anything like that. Obviously it's painted, and I'll take a better look at it. But everything looks good. Everything's solid. There's not a lot of wobble in the top slide or the cross slide that I can't take out with just adjusting the gibs. So overall, I'm really happy. So I'll take you over to the bench. I'll show you some of the accessory tooling that I got with this that really makes this worth the amount of money that I paid for it. And that'll be it. So there we go. All right, back over the bench. I got a good amount of micrometers. I have a buddy who works in a machine shop, and I asked him if he would check these against gauge blocks, and they're all pretty precise, within a tenth, so I'm pretty happy about that. This one is maybe the most interesting. It's a little handy micrometer. Come on. There we go. Handy micrometer. And it was, let's see, this was sold by Woolworths. So it's a little 1/2 inch, 0 to 1/2 inch. And it's just a little baby. I think the arm is Zamac pot metal. Made in the US&A, baby. Freedom. It's pretty good shape, and it's accurate too. It's close to as accurate as the Starretts. So, I'm pretty pleased with that. It's not much more than a toy, but this here's the workhorse. Nice Starrett. Yeah. So, I just gave these a light oil. I didn't touch them with steel wool or anything. They, the anvils look like they're in great shape. The torque screws work on all but one of them that I bought at another auction. So that's the Starrett. This one is a good old Pratt. I think it's a 2 to 3 inch. I think something like that. Good old Pratt. It's got a weird kind of looking armature. The anvils look in great shape. It doesn't have a little torque adjuster, torque screw. It has a lock, and it's also accurate. So happy with that. And this was the one that was in the best condition. This is a little 1 to 2 Starrett. Now, these Starretts that I've noticed, they, if I get this to focus, they have 30 seconds conversions to fractional and 16ths conversions, which is really nice because I had that memorized. And this also came with a little gauge block. Obviously shop quality, it's a little dinged up, a little corroded. I think it's 1 inch and something across, and it's a 1/4 inch diameter. You can see 1/4 on there. I'm sorry about the focus. Jeez. I'll get that fixed out in the next video. So that's nice. It came in this velvet case, and it says LS Starrett Co. Athol, Mass, USA. They still make stuff. You know? Good stuff. I got these little no-name Vernier Calipers, and I checked them against the Starrett mics, and they're pretty accurate within a thou or two. It's good enough for what I do. I got this live center. This was really beat up when I got it. It was covered in rust. This end screw just was out, so I might need to replace that. Definitely gonna have to replace that. And this, you can hear that. The ending was all chewy, a lot worse than that. So, I cleaned it out, put some mineral spirits in it, put some WD-40 in it. I'm just gonna pack this with grease and cross my fingers. Got to get a new live center pretty soon anyway, but this will do me for any work I have to turn in between centers. Let's see, I got a set of V-blocks. And those are useful. Different V's for laying out cylindrical work, stuff like that. I don't have a surface plate, but I do have a little sheet of marble. I'm going to check with a surface gauge that I have and maybe see if I can use it or use a certain spot of it for a surface plate, something like that. We'll see about that in a future video. I have that buddy in the machine shop. Maybe he'll help me out there, see how flat it is. And these V-blocks came with a couple of clamps. The only problem with that, if you can see that, is that those screws are right dickered. Both of them are. So that the bottom one I can get out. This one is bent up near the end and the bottom, so I can't even get that out. So I got to retap that. These are 1/4 inch by 24, and I have the right die for it. So it might work for a good first project for the lathe. I can't knurl, but I can get a handle on these. Just cut them off with a hacksaw, and then I'll have some usable V-block clamps, which would be nice. Great. Let's see. The last things. I'm gonna save that for last. That's nice. A couple of rulers. Most of these are, advertising rulers. I guess back in like the 60s, back in the day before I was a twinkle in anybody's eye. These were sort of given out by different machining companies to sort of advertise, given out at shop class or whatever. A 60-degree gauge, pretty cool. I think this is Starrett, LS Starrett & Co. Yeah, maybe. All right, not gonna focus. These little, this little like almost not micrometer caliper. These little eyeball calipers. Got someone's name on it. What does that say? Sowerby. So, Mr. Sowerby, thank you. Trying to put it to good use. Little pocket ruler. This little tiny baby one that has 32nds and 64ths on one side, and then 8ths and 16ths, I think, on the other side. Little tiny 1-inch ruler. And this one, this is what I'm really happy about. So this is made by Johnson. It's a number 44 ruler. And the special thing about it, I really want this to focus. The special thing about it is that it's got a protractor on the side. So this swings open, kind of like a pocket knife. Let's see if I can get it open with one hand. So this swings open, sort of pocket knife wise, and it has a little protractor in here. And then it has a little slide out here, so it also acts as a set of calipers, which is pretty fancy. And this is actually not steel at all. It says on the inside, German silver right here. I can't get it. There you go. German silver, which is actually a nickel alloy, nickel and copper. So it's corrosion resistant. This thing was, as shiny as the day it was made. It's really, really impressive. Really nice piece. I wonder how much it cost back in the day. It probably cost a small fortune. I'm lucky to have it. Almost completely forgot the good stuff is the cutting ends. So I got a selection of end mills. This is actually a Morse taper drill. I think it's a number 2 Morse taper. And a bunch of high-speed steel blanks. More than I could ever use. And a couple of them, let me see if I can find one really quick. A couple of them, yeah, there you go. That's brazed carbide on there, tungsten carbide. So that'd be a high-speed steel shank, and then that would be probably silicon bronze brazed right on there, ready to cut. So, you know, I have some carbide tooling if I can actually run this fast enough to accept it. Yeah. So that's about it. In the next video, I will start breaking that lathe apart, start showing you some of the ins and outs of the lathe, and we'll fix it up together. So see you in the next one. Bye-bye. If you made it this far in the video, I want to thank you for watching. I'm really excited to get this piece of old American iron back up and running and turning parts again the way it was meant to. I think first I'm going to attack the ways and get them all cleaned up, and like I said, I'm not going to do too much to them. I just want to get them free of rust and oiled up. Then I think I'll attack the headstock and the tailstock and make sure they're running true, etc. After that, I'll get the carriage done, and then the electrics, and it should be up and running. Obviously, there's going to be tooling that I haven't gotten to, and I'll start doing that on a slower basis, but I want to get to be turning parts as quickly as possible. So, hope you're ready to come along for the ride. If you have any comments, you can leave them below, and I'll do my best to answer them, and see you in the next video.